Our dead are never dead to us until we have forgotten them. George Eliot. Crime and deviancy seem to be hard-coded in Samuel Little's DNA. He was born of a crime when 19-year-old Paul McDowell got Bessie Mae Little pregnant. Bessie Mae was both a maid and a teenage prostitute. Though it has not been confirmed, it is believed she gave birth to Samuel in prison on June 7, 1940. After his birth, she promptly abandoned him. Samuel's grandmother moved the family to Lorain, Ohio, shortly after this, and she would become his primary caregiver. He was not an easy child to raise, always a rowdy troublemaker. It would become obvious as he grew that there was something wrong with Samuel Little's mind. As young as 5 years old, just a kindergarten student, Samuel claimed he began having sexual fantasies. One day, when he saw his teacher doing something as simple as touching her neck, he claimed he started fantasizing about strangling women. While he wouldn't act on this particular impulse for years, Samuel always found himself in some sort of trouble. Throughout school, Samuel had issues with discipline and achievement. He collected true crime magazines while in high school that depicted women being choked. Then, in 1956, Samuel would be convicted of breaking and entering. On his booking card for the Juvenile Institute, his mother would be listed as whereabouts unknown. Samuel would start traveling more widely after this, moving from place to place, and finding trouble wherever he went. He spent 1961 through 1964 in prison for breaking into a furniture store. While he was in prison, he took up boxing and claimed to have the makings of a prize fighter. He would not pursue it as a career, however, instead taking jobs as an ambulance attendant and cemetery worker after moving to Florida with his mother in the late 60s. By 1975, Samuel had racked up 26 arrests across 11 states. His charges included driving under the influence, fraud, shoplifting, solicitation, armed robbery, aggravated assault, assault of government officials, and attempted rape. Samuel received his first murder charge in 1982. He was arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi, for the death of 22-year-old Melinda Rose LaPree, who had gone missing that September. A grand jury declined to indict him, however. While Samuel was under investigation for Melinda's murder, he was extradited to Florida for involvement in another case. The prosecution identified Samuel as the last man who spent time with 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount. Patricia's body was found in September as well. However, due to the mistrust of witness testimony, he was acquitted in January 1984. After this, Samuel moved to California, near San Diego. Only a few months later, in October, Samuel was arrested for kidnapping, beating, and strangling 22-year-old Lori Barrows, who survived. Then, in November, he was found by police in the back seat of his car with an unconscious woman who he had also beaten and strangled. Both of these incidents would land him in prison for another 2.5 years. In February 1987, Samuel moved to Los Angeles. While living here, he committed at least 10 murders that wouldn't be discovered for far too long. Many years later, on September 5, 2012, Samuel was arrested at a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. He would be extradited to California for a narcotics charge, but that would be the least of his concerns. Authorities would use DNA to connect Samuel to the July 13, 1987 murder of Linda Alford, the September 3, 1987 murder of Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, and the August 14, 1989 murder of Audrey Nelson Everett. Linda Alford was 41 when she met Samuel. Authorities found his DNA under her fingernails and on her underwear. When her body was found in a Los Angeles alley, she was naked from the waist down, had blunt force trauma, and had been strangled to death. Her daughter identified her body. 46-year-old Guadalupe Apodaca was found in an abandoned auto repair shop in LA when a young boy peeked through the window and saw her body. It was determined that Samuel knelt on her chest and manually strangled her, causing her to have a seizure. She too was naked from the waist down, and blood was found in her anal cavity. 35-year-old Audrey Everett was found behind a nightclub in a dumpster. There was nothing on her to identify her body, which was naked from the waist down like the others. She had been repeatedly hit on the head and forcefully strangled. The identification of these cases caused him to be extradited to Los Angeles, where he would be charged on January 7, 2013. A few months later, police said Samuel Little was being investigated for his involvement with an additional 36 murders that had been committed in the 80s. Due to this, the LaPree case would be reopened. Samuel would go to trial for the murders of the 3 LA women in September 2014. The prosecution would present DNA evidence as well as witness testimony from people who had survived attacks from Little. He would be found guilty on September 25, 2014, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Samuel would insist upon his innocence, but that would change a few years later. In exchange for a transfer out of the LA prison where he was being held, he began confessing to dozens of murders. On November 9, 2018, his first confession would be for the murder of 29-year-old Melissa Thomas. She was strangled to death in January 1996, and her body was found in Opelousas, Louisiana. On November 13th, Samuel was charged with the murder of Denise Christie Brothers, a 32-year-old mother of 2 from Odessa, Texas. She went missing on January 1, 1994, but her body wasn't found until February 2nd. She had been strangled to death, like all of Little's previous victims. Samuel had confessed to killing her in May 2018 when he spoke with a Texas Ranger. He pleaded guilty to the charge and would receive a 4th life sentence on December 13th. 2 days after receiving the murder charge, on November 15th, the Russell County, Alabama District Attorney's Office announced that Samuel confessed to the 1979 murder of 23-year-old Brenda Alexander. The following day, on November 16th, Macon, Georgia sheriffs announced that Samuel confessed to the 1977 strangling of an unidentified woman and the 1982 strangling of 18-year-old Fredonia Smith. In 1982, Samuel also killed 55-year-old Dorothy Richards, who was found in Houma, Louisiana. 40-year-old Daisy McGuire was also killed in Houma in 1996. On November 19th, Sheriff Troy Peterson of Harrison County, Mississippi, announced Samuel's confession of the 1978 murder of 36-year-old Julia Critchfield, whom he strangled and threw off a cliff. The next day, officials from Lee County, Mississippi, announced the confession of the 2005 murder of 46-year-old Nancy Carol Stevens. This case would be presented to a grand jury in January 2019. 2 more confessions came on November 21st. First was the 1978 murder of 19-year-old Evelyn Weston in South Carolina. Next was the 1982 killing of 20-year-old Rosie Hill in Marion County, Florida. A few days later, on November 27th, the FBI announced that a violent criminal apprehension program team confirmed 34 of Samuel's numerous confessions and were working on the rest. One of the confessions led to the resolution of a cold case in Maryland. In December, Samuel was indicted for the strangling death of 23-year-old Linda Sue Boards. She was found on May 15, 1981, near U.S. Route 68. Another of Samuel's victims identified in December was Martha Cunningham. She was 34 when Samuel strangled her to death in 1975. Cuyahoga County, Ohio prosecutors announced several indictments against Samuel on May 31, 2019, involving a number of women. Mary Jo Payton was just 21 when she met Samuel at a bar in Cleveland, Ohio. The pair left the bar together, and he took her to an abandoned factory where he would choke her and throw her down some stairs. Mary's body was discovered by 2 workers from a nearby company on July 3, 1984. Rose Evans, 32, was also killed in Cleveland. Sometime around August 24, 1991, Samuel would offer her a ride. He would take her to an abandoned area and strangle her in the car. Rose remained unidentified until sometime in 1992, when a thumbprint uploaded to an FBI database got a match. A third victim was killed in Cleveland in either 1977 or 1978. The still unidentified woman was found on March 18, 1983. According to the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, she was likely black and between the ages of 17 and 35. Her skeleton was found with some clothes and jewelry. Those were not the only victims in Ohio, however. Samuel confessed to killing one woman in Akron, who was later identified as 34-year-old Roberta Tanderick. This had been a cold case that dated back to 1991. Samuel also confessed to killing 2 women from Cincinnati. The first was 32-year-old Annie Lee Stewart, who was murdered on October 11, 1981. He strangled her and dumped her body behind some apartments in Grove City. The second was a Jane Doe, killed sometime between 1980 and 1999. She was black, slender, wore glasses, and was between 15 and 50 years of age. He strangled her and left her beside a cigarette billboard. Samuel was indicted for the deaths of the 2 Cincinnati women on June 7, 2019. In November 2020, Samuel confessed to 2 more murders that happened in Florida, one of which another man had been wrongfully convicted of. Samuel confessed to a total of 93 murders, 60 of which have since been confirmed. The majority of his victims were prostitutes, addicts, or homeless. Samuel believed by picking vagrants and society's cast-offs, there would be fewer people looking for them and less evidence pointing to him. Despite the number of lives he took, Samuel was only ever convicted for the deaths of 8 of his victims. Samuel Little died in hospital on December 30th, 2020. No cause of death has been given, but he was known to have diabetes, heart problems, and a variety of other health problems. During Samuel's confessions, he drew portraits of his victims. These portraits helped solve cold cases, including the identification of 30-year-old Zena Jones on April 20th, 2022. She had been killed by Little in Memphis, Tennessee in 1990. To help in the identification of unknown and unmatched victims, the FBI have posted Samuel's portraits on their website for public view. They are still looking for any information linked to Samuel's confessions and can be contacted at 1-800-CALL-FBI or tips.fbi.gov. The link to the portraits will be listed in the description below. Samuel Little was confirmed to be actively murdering women between 1970 and 2005. It is entirely possible, however, that he may have started as early as 1960 and continued until his arrest in 2012. Thank you for tuning in to Villains with Vaughn, and please, if you have any information connected to any of the victims of the crimes of Samuel Little, check the description below for the link to the FBI website where you can get in touch with a professional to help assist them on possibly solving a cold case or just getting some closure for families of the victims. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and ring that bell for future posts, which we post every other Wednesday. And of course, be safe out there.